We acknowledge the first Australians as the traditional custodians of the continent, whose culture is the oldest living culture in human history. We pay our respects to elders, past, present and emerging, and we respect their cultural heritage, beliefs and relationship with the land. We extend our respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people here today. They share the memories, traditions and hopes of the traditional ancestors with the new generations today and in the future. We would also like to thank them for looking after this land for thousands of years.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our second session for our special Earth Science Week event today. My name is Karen from Australian Environmental Education and from Virtual Excursions Australia. So for those of you that have just joined in, we are using a webinar format. So please put your questions in the Q&A. Please don't put comments. I love everyone saying hello, but please just keep those ones separate, just so we can make sure that all of the questions we can get to Grace from Australian Age of Dinosaurs, who will be joining us in just a moment. For those of you that might miss anything or have technical problems and drop out, there will be a recording of this session as well. I'm going to be trying to keep an eye on the chat and give some, the Q&A, I should say, and give some of those to Grace when there's time. So Grace, are you ready? Are you able to turn your camera on? Excellent.
Good to go.
I'll hand over to you, everyone. We've got Grace from Australian Age of Dinosaurs up in Queensland.
Good morning, everyone. Hope you're having a good day. So I work for the Dinosaur Museum out in Winton, so that's in the middle of Queensland, and I had a bit of a look through some of the Q&A before, and there were some really good questions coming through. And probably the most important question that I'd like to answer first off, because it's actually going to kickstart me today, is does Australia have dinosaurs? And the answer is yes. We've got 25 published dinosaurs in Australia so far, and I've brought a couple of friends with me just to help make today go nice and smooth. Now, for anyone who has been to the museum before or has relatives who have visited us before, you may already be familiar with this dinosaur. This is a carnivorous dinosaur, a meat-eating dinosaur. This one is nicknamed Banjo, but his scientific name is Austria Lavenator wintonensis, Winton Southern Hunter. And a lot of the time when people come to the museum, they say Banjo is their favourite dinosaur because he's a meat eater, so he's nice and scary, and that's always people's favourite dinosaur. But yes, we do have dinosaurs in Australia. We actually have 25 published dinosaurs so far, so that just means there's 25 dinosaur skeletons that have been discovered that are unique enough that scientists can look at them and say, yes, that is a brand new type of dinosaur. It's completely different from everyone else. So we're actually pretty lucky in Australia in that we've got a bit of diversity. We've got some different dinosaurs. Probably the most commonly found of which are these. So sauropods, long-necked plant-eating dinosaurs. There's 5 or 6 different species of sauropod at the moment in Australia, and all of them have been found here in Queensland, which is actually really exciting. We're not sure why we're only finding the sauropods in Queensland. We know they existed in other parts of the country. They've actually found footprints of massive sauropods off of the coast of Broome in Western Australia. So we know they were here. They covered pretty much the whole country, but we haven't yet figured out why we're only finding their bones here in Winton. Now, somebody did ask what the biggest dinosaur was in Australia, and that's actually one of the sauropods, and it's the newest sauropod, and that's a dinosaur called Australa Creeperensis. So it's a big, big sauropod that's been found in Eromanga, which is in the Quilpie Shire. So instead of the direct middle of Queensland, it's a little bit further south. So about if you think of dividing Queensland into 4 quarters, it's in the 3rd quarter, so right towards the bottom there. So it's pretty exciting, pretty lucky. After sauropods, the next most commonly found fossil in Australia are actually ornithopods. So those are plant-eating dinosaurs who could walk on 2 and 4 legs. This one here is Mutabar Asaurus, and this is one of my favourite dinosaurs. mostly because, like Mutabar Asaurus, I also have a really big nose. So we got to stick together. There's two big ornithopods in Australia. That's Mutabar Asaurus from Queensland and Fostoria, which was found down in New South Wales. And both of them would have been fairly large ornithopods. So you're looking at 3 to 4 meters tall, a couple of meters long. So these animals would have been a bit bigger than most of the other ornithopods being found in Australia at that time. So most of the ornithopods that are being found, particularly in Victoria and New South Wales, are actually these tiny little dinosaurs. So the smallest is only about 30 centimeters tall. So if you can picture a 30 centimeter long ruler, that's how tall those dinosaurs would have been at their smallest, and then about a meter long, which I think that's adorable. So those are my second favorite dinosaurs because I think they're just really, really cute. We've got to enjoy the cute dinosaurs, don't we? But yeah, so we've got quite a fair few of those. Most of those ornithopods are being found in Victoria, and a couple are being found in New South Wales as well. After that, we then have our theropods, our meat-eating dinosaurs. Banjo, Austria Lavenator, is the most completed carnivorous skeleton we have of a dinosaur in Australia, and he's only about 25% complete, which doesn't sound like a lot. That's not a lot of the skeleton, but that's because what's happening with our dinosaurs is only a little bit of the skeleton is being preserved. What we think is happening in Winton is our dinosaurs, especially the sauropods, they're walking down into a muddy billabong, so a lake or a watering hole. They're walking down, they're getting a drink, but they're walking down into the mud, and because a lot of our dinosaurs back then were quite heavy, they're sinking into the mud. And whatever goes down into the mud has a higher chance of being preserved compared to anything above the mud layer, which could have been exposed to scavenging dinosaurs, so predators or opportunistic hunters. So what ends up happening is most of what's being found of dinosaurs in Australia, especially in Queensland, is from the lower half of the body. So I'll use my trusty sauropod again. So we're finding lots of limb bones, so arms and legs, and lots of ribs. Ribs are probably our most commonly found bone here in Winton, especially. Ready? How am I doing? I'm not going too quickly. Am I still making sense?
Absolutely. We've got lots of questions still coming through. A few of them I feel like you might have answered already in terms of some of the small dinosaurs that you were saying that, less than 30 centimetres in size. The largest dinosaur was Cooper. Do you want to give that scientific name again? Because we had lots of questions about the largest dinosaur.
Yep. So Cooper is Australotitan Creeperensis. So that's a little bit of a mouthful, but it means the southern giant, basically. So Cooper, the Cooper Creek or Cooper River, I think it was quite close to the dig site of that dinosaur. So Cooper is another big sauropod, a big long-necked dinosaur, and I believe he was discovered back in 2005, 2006. So a long time ago for a lot of you kids. But because the animal was so big and so large, it took years and years and years for preparators to work on the bones. So a preparator is someone whose whole job is to remove the dirt or rock that's covering the bones. So it can be a really hard job because sometimes it's only a colour change or a texture change that can tell you the difference between the rock or the bone. Cooper is pretty big, so you're looking at close to 7 meters tall, according to some estimates. So 7 meters tall, that's massive. That's 3.5 men standing on top of each other's shoulders. That's huge. And then you're looking at about 30 odd meters long, which is a pretty large animal. You're looking at somewhere around that 25-ton weight mark. So really, really big. Comparatively, most of the sauropods we're finding here in Winton, so most of the bones that I get to work on, they're usually 12 to 15 meters long, maybe 15 to 18 if they're a bigger dinosaur for us. And then they're usually about 20 tons and only about 3 to 3.5 meters tall. So Cooper is actually twice the size of the sauropods we're finding here in Winton, which is really, really cool.
That's amazing. That's just incredible that there's just so much bigger. We did have a couple of questions as well about the oldest dinosaur. So I'm not sure if they're asking the oldest one that we've found in Australia or the oldest dinosaur around the world. So that could be a great next question as well.
Yep. So that's actually a really tricky question. So when you ask oldest or youngest, that's going to be dependent on the most recent research. So what has been found and what has been publicized, because someone may have found an animal that they're confident is older or younger than everything else, but until a paper has been released, you can't actually talk about it. So I think that's the hard part with paleontology, is you've got to be pretty good at keeping secrets. I'm not good at secret keeping, so I just tell people to not tell me anything until we're allowed to talk about it, just to play it safe. But at the moment, there is a lot of debate as to what's the oldest dinosaur being found across the world, whereas in Australia, the oldest dinosaur that has been found so far is a meat-eating dinosaur. Not Banjo, he's only about 95 to 98 million years old. So that's during the Cretaceous time period, so the third and final period in the age of dinosaurs. And that's what the scientists call the Mesozoic era. So instead, the oldest dinosaur that we have in Australia is from Western Australia, and that's a meat-eating dinosaur called Ozrapta. So Ozrapta is from the Jurassic, so there's a bit of a time jump between Ozrapta and Austria Lavenator. But the only problem is that Ozrapta is one single bone, and I think it's the ankle bone. So it's only a very small bone, and because it's so old, it has been eroded pretty heavily. So not a lot of information can come from it. Enough information that scientists at the time could say that Ozrapta was probably a new species because it looked pretty different to most other carnivorous dinosaurs that had been discovered across the world at the time. So fingers crossed, they're going to find some more bones over in Western Australia. Hopefully there'll be some more bones of Ozrapta, and they'll be able to start putting the skeleton together and figure out exactly what he would have looked like. Did that answer your question?
Excellent, thank you. I'm sure that covered a lot of the information that people were after. It's very tricky. Lots of people are asking about how many bones in dinosaurs, and I kind of just explained that, you know, as you said, we don't always find all of the fossils, so that's a hard one. And a few people are just asking a little bit about what makes a dinosaur. I heard some people mentioning about, you know, how many dinosaurs were flying. So maybe a little bit on the what makes a dinosaur can help with some of these questions too.
Yeah, so very, very good questions, kids. So what makes a dinosaur a dinosaur? There is a little bit of debate over that one, but usually it is a land-dwelling animal, so an animal that lives on land. They lived during the Mesozoic era, so from 252 million years ago to about 66 million years ago. Their hips are going to be in a certain placement, and their pelvis is going to be facing a certain direction. There's an extra hole in their skull, which scientists are still debating the purpose of, and they would have been egg-laying creatures. So that's the bare bones. That's the bare bones of what makes a dinosaur. So when you start thinking about flying reptiles like pterosaurs, so pterodactyl or pteranodon, those are a flying reptile. So they are a cousin to dinosaurs. They share a common ancestor, but they aren't a dinosaur themselves. And it's the same again with a lot of your marine reptiles. So stuff like Kronosaurus or the ichthyosaurs, those are a marine reptile. So they're not a dinosaur. They do share a common ancestor with dinosaurs. So I think there was a question early on about whether or not Loch Ness Monster might have been a dinosaur. There's a lot of debate over that one as well. If Loch Ness is anything, it's probably going to be a marine reptile like a pliosaur or a plesiosaur, but they're going to have to find the skeleton to actually, or the animal to actually prove that one. So that one's a little bit tricky. So that's sort of your bare bones of what is a dinosaur. Depending on what dinosaur you have, depending on the species and depending on the family group it belongs to, that's going to influence how many bones that animal is going to have, because some animals will have more or less bones depending on their species. So just bringing our sauropod back in again, we actually have a lot of problems with our sauropods because a lot of the time, especially here in Winton, we don't find the neck or head, we don't find the backbone, we don't find the tailbone. And that's because when our sauropods goes for a walk down into the muddy billabong and they get stuck in the mud, it's the legs and the belly that go in first. Quite often the hips will sink down, but usually what the animal is doing down in the mud is trying to keep their head above the mud. They're trying to use their tail to sort of, help get themselves back out again. So they're probably going to be swishing that around as well. So because the vertebrae, so the neck, back, and tailbone, they're going to be above the mud. So what that ends up meaning is that unfortunately, if they're above the mud, when the animal dies, a carnivore is going to come along and they're going to eat all of those nice juicy vertebrae. This is actually really annoying because it means we don't know exactly how many neck, back, or tail vertebrae our sauropods have. And sauropods actually change the amount of vertebrae they have for each section depending on the species. So for a lot of sauropods, they're going to have between 13 and 16 neck vertebrae. And it's really annoying because we want to know how many neck vertebrae our sauropods have. So Diamantinosaurus, Savanosaurus, we haven't yet found too many neck bones from them. But what's actually really exciting in our laboratory is we're currently working on a dinosaur nicknamed Judy, who is a sauropod. And Judy is very, very lucky. She's about 50% complete, which is absolutely mind-boggling. And she has an almost fully completed neck. So that means that once we figure out what sort of species Judy is, we can then write a paper saying, congratulations, we've now found out more information about this species. And thanks to Judy, we'll be able to say how many neck bones, how many backbones or tailbones her particular species has. So that's really, really exciting. But that's going to take a little while to finish working on.
Excellent, Grace. Now, there's been a couple of questions regarding the dinosaurs specifically that you're finding up in Winton and when they were being first discovered. So I'm sure that you were going to cover it, but if not, a little bit of history of what you've been discovering specifically up at Winton and how and when.
Yep. So everything in Winton kind of kick-started back in 1999 when a local landowner, David Elliott, he was out mustering his sheep on his bike and he had to swerve his bike to avoid running over a pile of pretty-looking rocks. And when he went back and had a closer look at those pretty-looking rocks, we don't find a lot of rocks in Winton, so they tend to stand out. He went back and had a closer look at those pretty rocks, and one of them, to him, looked like the thigh bone, so the upper leg bone, except that thigh bone is about the same size as myself. So a thigh bone as big as a person, that can't have come from a cow or a sheep. So David knew he must have found a dinosaur. He just didn't know what one. So he took a whole bunch of photos, collected some of the smaller bone fragments, posted that down to Queensland Museum in Brisbane, and he asked the experts. And they came back saying, congratulations, you've just found a sauropod. And the rest, as they say, is history. The vast majority of what we're finding in Winton are our big sauropods, our big long-necked plant-eating dinosaurs, and we've been running active dinosaur digs since 2002. So from 2002 up to 2021, we've run at least one dinosaur dig every single year, except for last year. So we actually tried to run 2 digs this year to make up for the lack of last year. We almost always find sauropods, and depending on how well preserved the skeleton is going to depend on how much material we find. At the moment, Judy is our most completed sauropod discovery at 50% complete, so that's pretty exciting. And hopefully she's going to give us a lot more information about Australian sauropods. So we're looking forward to that one. For our dinosaur digs here in Winton, they are a little bit different to those run across the rest of the country, with the exception of Eromanga, the Eromanga Natural History Museum. And that's actually because of our topsoil here in Winton. So I'm going to get a little bit sciencey for a minute. I'm going to get nerdy first because I have a jar of dirt, and that is my favourite sentence to say. So what I've got here is an example of what our dinosaur digs look like. So on top, we have our top surface soil, and this is called black soil. Down below, we have a lighter soil called siltstone or yellow shale. And the siltstone layer is actually where most of our skeletons are going to be preserved, except the black soil, it's full of these big, massive mud cracks. And what happens with the black soil is when we do receive rainfall, the rain is going to wash down all of the mud cracks that are all throughout the black soil. And once you have all the new water funneling down those mud cracks, It's going to pick up all of the loose surface dirt and dead grasses and wash that down as well. So once you have all the new dirt down below, it's going to push all the old dirt back up and around again. So this gives us what we call a self-rotating or self-mulching process, which can be a bit confusing. But the black soil is pretty sticky. So while this rotating process is happening, the black soil is going to latch onto anything and everything that's inside of it and slowly start to pull it up again. So a little example I've got here, this is the bottom jaw or a copy of the bottom jaw of Banjo. So what will happen usually out in the pit is the dinosaur bone has been preserved down in the siltstone. The black soil is going to continuously go through that self-rotating process, and slowly, bit by bit, that jawbone is going to be brought up to the surface where a local landowner can find it. But this is a very, very slow process. So this usually happens over a couple of hundred or over a couple of thousand years. So it isn't quick by any stretch of the imagination. At the moment, we're just really lucky that so many of our locals now know that our pretty looking rocks are dinosaur bones. So usually what they're doing is giving us a phone call, shooting us an email, or sometimes just showing up with a whole bunch of fossils in the tray of their ute and ask us to identify what it is that they've discovered. Most of the time, they have found a dinosaur, so we ask our local if we can run a dig on their property. 9 times out of 10, our local says, yep, go for gold. So we find a time where our 2 schedules match up, we gather our dig crew, head out to that site, and we start the excavation process. It can be pretty slow going because our bones are so old and so delicate. We need to take our time to make sure we're not going to accidentally damage any bones. But we've also got the problem of the black soil. So you see there's quite a fair bit of black soil on top of the siltstone. We've got anywhere from 1 to 3 meters of black soil on top of our siltstone. And that black soil is very dense and very sticky. It's quite difficult to dig through. So what we use is a front end loader. So a big, big heavy machine. We come on in and carefully scrape away a couple of inches of topsoil at a time until all of the black soil is gone. We're down in that siltstone layer. Normally, the siltstone is bright yellow, but when it's close to a fossil, it goes through a chemical reaction and changes colour from bright yellow to a rusty orange. So what we're going to do is use a smaller machine called the mini digger, as well as shovels and crowbars to dig down through the siltstone, the yellow siltstone, until we find that orange colour change. And from there, we know we're close to a dinosaur. So once we're in the orange siltstone, we're going to use the smaller tools. So screwdrivers and dustpans and brushes. And we're going to use those tools to carefully remove the dirt that's covering our bones. Once we know roughly how large a bone is, we're going to wrap it up in a jacket for safe transportation. We're going to bring it up here to the museum where we can safely work on it in our lab. Do we have a couple of other good questions floating around, Karen? Or?
Yes, we do. I'm just frantically typing away as well. So just a reminder, everyone, I think Grace had already said there's 25 described species of dinosaur throughout Australia. And really all those ones that are in the marine environment, the oceans, they're the marine or reptiles. And we had some great questions about looking up the how do you find the fossils, which I think you've just answered really well. And in different parts of Australia, that's a different process, isn't it? They'll be looking at different layers, different sediments. But this is specific to Winton. And also a lot, so we're asking about if you found any skulls.
Ooh, that's a really good question. Now, skulls are actually really, really rare because usually the skull is the first thing to go. It's going to be what the dinosaur will keep above the mud if it goes down into the mud. But every once in a while, we do get lucky. So I'm just going to show you this one. This is a little model that one of our paleontologists has created. So I'll hold him up so he's a little bit clearer for everyone. So this is a model of Austria Lavenator. This is a model of what we think Banjo's skull would look like. Banjo belongs to a big family group called the Megaraptors, and a lot of the Megaraptors look fairly similar to each other. So we've used all of their shared similarities to create this topmost section of the skull. And the reason why we've done that is because we didn't find that piece. We found this piece. We found the bottom jaw. So we found the two sections of the bottom jaw. I'm just going to bring it a little bit closer up to, there we go. How cool is that? So we've done our best to make it as realistic as possible. So this is actually based quite heavily on the jaw that we have found. So as you can see there, he's got these sharp pointing teeth facing backwards. So the idea here being that Banjo would come up to his prey and he would chomp down on his prey and tear his head back like that. I hope that makes sense. I'm gonna do a bit more of a demo for you. So here's one of our sauropods, very unlucky sauropod. Now, most of the time, Banjo's not going to be hunting the sauropods. They're too big. His main prey is actually going to be our ornithopods. Actually not. He's going to be using our ornithopods, so the smaller plant-eating dinosaurs. So what's going to happen is Banjo, I'll hold it up again so it's a bit clearer. Banjo actually has 3 big claws on his hand. Sorry, 3 claws on his hand. 2 of them are quite large. That's the 2 you can see here. And then there's a third, much smaller one. And what we suspect is happening is Banjo's coming up to his prey and he's ripping and tearing them apart using those big claws of his. And then once he's got a chunk of meat on his claw, he's going to come up with his jaw and so he's going to latch onto the meat that he's got on the claw and he's going to tear it like that, and then he's going to swallow it straight down. So we're conserving as much energy as possible, like many meat-eating animals do today.
Excellent, thank you. And we did certainly have a question about which is the sort of the most dangerous Australian dinosaur. So I think you've been able to demonstrate that with Banjo very well. And I had another great question here that I'm just going back to have a little look for. So it's a little bit of a two-part. So one of them, there's been a few questions coming in for us about how you reconstruct the fossils, how you put them back together, but also linking to that, how do you come up with the names for your dinosaurs that you're discovering? And I know you've got some great names up there.
Alrighty, so I'll answer the name question first because it's a shorter answer, and that way I won't forget to answer them later. Basically, what we do is go, okay, are there any defining features of our dinosaur? Is there anywhere particular it was found? Is there anyone we want to honour? So, for example, Banjo, his scientific name is Austria Lavenator wintonensis, Winton's southern hunter. Sounds a bit of a mouthful, isn't it? Matilda, who is probably our most commonly found sauropod here in Winton, is Diamantinosaurus matildae. Matilda's giant lizard of the Diamantina River. So the Diamantina River cuts straight through Winton, and a lot of the dinosaurs we are discovering are being found on properties that have the Diamantina River or the Diamantina channels cutting through them. So that's how that name comes about. Austria Lavenator, he's found in Australia. He's found specifically here in Winton. He's got these big claws on his hand. I'll hold up these ones again. He's got these big claws on his hand, so he must be a hunting animal. He's not going to have these just as a back scratcher. So we're going to mention those defining features in his name. That's how we come up with the scientific names. For the nicknames, we have a bit more fun with that one. So for example, Banjo and Matilda. Matilda was actually found first. So she was found on a property that had the Diamantina River cutting straight through it. And on the banks of the Diamantina, actually up where I grew, near where I grew up, Waltzing Matilda was written on the banks of the Diamantina, and Waltzing Matilda was written by Banjo Patterson, so A.B. Banjo Patterson. So when we found Matilda, we'd had a string of boy names for our dinosaurs, and we thought we'd spice things up. So we went, you know what, Matilda's a pretty good name. So we found Matilda first, we called her Matilda. And then when we discovered Banjo in the same dig pit, we went, you know what, let's call this one Banjo, Banjo and Matilda. That sounds awesome. Really. So that's our name question. And then, sorry, Karen, what was our first question? A really good question there.
About how to piece the dinosaurs together. How do you do the reconstructions?
Yeah, so that one actually takes quite some time because usually we are only finding about 10% of a single skeleton. If we find 10%, we get pretty excited, and anything more than that, we're ecstatic. So I'm just going to use the sauropod as the main example because we find so many of them here in Winton. So we'll go to a number of different sites, and a lot of the time we're just going to find one or two bones. So we might find the upper arm bone and the two lower leg bones. We might just find the thigh bone. We might find a couple of scattered ribs. We're not usually going to find a lot of the animal. And if we find, say, a whole front leg, that's exciting. That doesn't happen too often. So what we've actually got is a master's researcher. And so her job at the moment, as I understand it, is she's actually going through and she is scanning all of the bones that we've currently worked on from all of our sauropods. So she's concentrating on them at the moment. She's scanning all of those bones and putting it into a computer program. That way she can then come back through and analyze those bones and look for defining markers. So your defining markers are going to help you figure out what sort of a dinosaur you have. You're going to be looking for what you're only going to see in this one particular species. So, for example, how wide the thigh bone is, or how short, how long it is, how wide it is. You're going to look to see if there's any extra marks on the edges. So if there's any extra wings or something like that that come off of it, if that makes sense. So that one can take a little bit of time. So it is pretty hard. So she's doing really good. So what she's going to do is go through and say, yep, okay, this dinosaur is this species and that dinosaur is that species. And then, and this is going to be quite a long project, so then what she's got to do is go, okay, where are all the Diamantinosaurus skeletons? Okay, cool, here's all our Diamantinosauruses. Alrighty, how many of them had a thigh bone? Yep, okay, how many of them had the two lower leg bones? How many of them have a front foot, a back foot? How many bones have we found? And then you're slowly, piece by piece, you're going to use all of these different dinosaurs to build up your skeleton. So it does take quite some time, but we're pretty excited. So hopefully we'll know a bit more about our dinosaurs, especially our sauropods, in the next couple of years. So looking forward to that one.
Excellent. Thank you for that, Grace. We have had a couple of people still asking what your other favourite dinosaurs are.
Yeah. So my absolute favourite dinosaur is a tiny little plant-eating dinosaur in Victoria called Lielanosaura. So it's a bit of a mouthful. So Lielanosaura is only very small, and it's about 1 metre long, and 70 centimetres of that. So 70% of the body is its tail. And I think that's adorable. It has these big eyes, probably because a lot of the time back then, we would have been quite dark in Australia. So Australia, slight tangent, sorry, kids. So Australia is going through something called Continental Drift. Most of our continents are doing this at the moment. Continental Drift is where your big continents, your big land masses, are steadily drifting further and further away from their original starting point. So Australia is currently drifting north about 10 centimetres per year. So that's roughly the same rate at which our fingernails grow at, roughly. So during the age of dinosaurs, we were actually a lot further south, and we were actually connected to Antarctica at that time. So what this actually means is, like how the Antarctic currently will have a couple of months of the year where it doesn't have any sun just because of the way the Earth is rotating, there would have been time when Australia would have been partially without light as well, which is actually really cool to look at. So Lielanosaura has these big eyes, probably to help it see in the dark. And I think that's just really, really cute. My second favourite, like I said before, is Mutabar Asaurus, because, you know, we both have big noses. We've got to stick together. And then after that, my favourite dinosaur, and all my favourites are Australian dinosaurs. That doesn't happen too often. After that, it's Kanbasaurus. So this is a dinosaur that was discovered outside of Richmond. So that's one of our neighbouring towns. So it was discovered outside of Richmond back in 1989. And this is Australia's most completed dinosaur skeleton. It is 90% complete, and it still had its last meal. So its gut contents preserved inside of it. I know that sounds pretty gross, but this is actually one of only 6 plant-eating dinosaurs worldwide to still have the gut contents preserved inside of it. And I think that's really, really cool.
That is really exciting that you found one so complete. And we had Beck asking as well, can you sometimes use different bits from different animals that have been found to help recreate the whole species?
Yes, if the species you have found are close enough, or if the skeletons you have found are from the same species, yes, you can use them to help build on each other. So for us, with our sauropods especially, Diamantinosaurus is currently our most commonly found species out here. Matilda, our first Diamantinosaurus, she was about 35% complete. So that's pretty exciting. That's quite a fair bit of the skeleton. So every new confirmed Diamantinosaurus that we find from here on out, if they have any extra bones that we didn't have with Matilda, so any neck vertebrae, any backbone, any tailbone, we're actually going to start adding that to our picture of Diamantinosauros. And eventually, hopefully, we'll have found enough Diamantinosauruses and they'll have been completed enough that we can actually add, we'll have a complete Diamantinosaurus skeleton. However, if you have cousin species, so species that are closely related, sometimes you can use them to help fill in each other's blank spots, but it depends on how closely related they are to each other. So kids, if you think about it, so sometimes, first cousins look really, really similar to each other. So if you see two cousins standing side by side, sometimes you look at them and go, oh, they could be siblings. Whereas other times you'll have two cousins standing side by side and sometimes they look nothing alike and you don't even think, oh, yeah, they're cousins, they're related. A lot of the time you go, oh, they must be good friends. So it's almost like that, if that makes sense. Hope I didn't confuse anyone.
Thank you, Grace. Now, we have had some questions throughout the session as well about dinosaurs disappearing, specifically about the extinction of the dinosaurs and maybe the impacts of the extinction of the dinosaurs in Australia. And, what evidence do we have of that?
Yep. So that's a really, really good question. So most of you would have heard the current theory about the dinosaur mass extinction, and that is that a meteorite or asteroid crash landed into the Earth. Now, they have actually found the crash site of this meteorite. It's off the coast of Mexico, I'm pretty sure, or New Mexico, one of the two. So it's over North America. It's off the coast of North America. And so what's actually happened is when we had this meteorite crash land into the Earth, it's a little bit like if you throw a rock into a pool or a body of water, it's going to cause a splash. And that's basically what happened here. This big meteorite crash landed into the Earth, and it threw up all of this dust and debris into the atmosphere. And because we've got all of this dust and debris up in the atmosphere, that's clogging it all up. But also, the Earth was a lot younger back then, and it was pretty reactive. So when you had this big meteorite crash landing into the Earth, that actually set off a big earthquake. These earthquakes then set off tsunamis, and they also set off volcanic reactions. There were a lot of volcanoes back then. So as one volcano is being set off and it's exploding, it's erupting, it's setting off its neighbor and so on, so on, so on. So you end up with a lot of activity going on all over the world. There is a bit of debate from scientists, but basically they all agree that all of the dust and debris, all of the smoke, all of the chemicals, all of the ash that's being released by the eruptions and also by the original crash, that would have blocked out the sun for quite some time. Some say as little as 1 year, some say as long as 10 years, the sky was actually blocked out. So it was very heavy overcast, if you like. Most scientists seem to agree that it was only about 3 years. But even still, that's a really long time. So it's overcast. So that's going to affect the temperatures. That means there's a big drop in temperatures. They get a lot colder than what most of those animals would have been used to. So if there's any animal that couldn't handle that temperature change, they're going to die out. But on top of that, the atmosphere is changing because there's all these new chemicals. So many of you would have heard that volcanoes, when they're releasing all of these gases, a lot of those gases are toxic. So they're actually deadly, or at least very harmful to the body of any living organism. So all of those new fumes, those new gases, they're going to be affecting everything as well. So if you were too close to the volcanoes, or at least to the smell coming out of the volcanoes, the gases and all of that, that's going to start affecting everything as well. So tree life as well, plant life, if they couldn't handle that lack of sunlight, or if they were in a place where there wasn't a lot of sunlight trying to break through the cloud cover, then a lot of those plants are dying off too. So what that ends up meaning is a lot of your plants are dying, so your plant eaters are running out of food. And if they couldn't adapt, so if they only ate one specific plant and that plant couldn't handle the temperature changes or the sunlight changes, that plant's gone, those plant eaters are gone. And as the plant eaters are dying out, then your meat eaters are dying out as well, because they're running out of prey. Or maybe they only ate one specific animal, and if that dies out, then they die out. So it was one great big chain reaction. There are a fair few animals that managed to survive, and they managed to live long enough that they could breed and evolve until eventually we now have the animals we recognise today. And there's quite a few of those. In Australia, we are seeing a lot of your older animals. So we've got crocodiles, which are a distant relative to dinosaurs. We also have the lungfish. They're floating around there. So they're a particular type of fish that's still around from the age of dinosaurs, and they haven't really changed all that much, which is pretty cool. They're a pretty funky looking fish. But we're also seeing a lot of diversity that is specific to our country. And that's because our continents, our country, it actually split from everyone else pretty early on. So remember, we've got that continental drift, we've got the continents steadily drifting further and further away. So what that ends up meaning, is that the animals we have here in Australia were evolving specifically for Australia, and we were evolving our own particular little round of diversity in Australia. So all of our native animals who are here from the get-go, they evolved specifically for Australia, which is pretty cool.
Excellent, thank you. Now, we've had a few questions as well, just thinking about the bird linked to dinosaurs as well. If you just want to maybe clear that up for some people as well.
Yep. So there's some new research that's come out and has caused a bit of debate about that. So I'll come back to that in a sec. Now, most scientists these days will agree that birds evolved out of dinosaurs. Specifically, these ones, the theropods. So theropod is your one big umbrella term. So big umbrella term. So if you think about how a Dalmatian and a dingo are two types of canine. So canine's your big umbrella term. It's kind of like that. So theropod, meat eaters, that's our big umbrella term. And there are two branches for our theropod family tree. So the two branches of our theropod family tree are avian theropods and non-avian theropods. Feathered and non-feathered. So your feathered would be stuff like T-Rex of North America, that's why everyone's heard of it, Velociraptor of Mongolia, whereas your non-feathered dinosaurs would be stuff like Spinosaurus of Egypt or even Austria Lavenator of Australia. So the new research that's coming out is saying that birds didn't just evolve out of dinosaurs, they are still dinosaurs. And so there's a fair bit of debate over that one. If you look at a cassowary, an emu, if you look at any of our rogers or cranes or anything like that, you can see why the scientists say that, birds are still dinosaurs. But again, there's a lot of debate over that one, and that's better left to the scientists. For the most part, though, birds are definitely descended from dinosaurs. They're definitely related to them, and they are the closest living relative that we have to dinosaurs left alive today. Whether or not they're still dinosaurs is up for debate.
Excellent, thank you. And maybe that's a great one for you guys to do a bit of extra research and have a discussion in class, whether you think that, there's enough of a difference that they're descended from, direct descendant of dinosaurs, or whether they should still be called dinosaurs. Excellent. We did have a few questions throughout the session that would be great to finish off with, Grace, just about what you do up there in Winton and what some of the other jobs there are up at the Australian Age of Dinosaurs.
Ooh, very good question. So I'm the education coordinator here for Age of Dinosaurs. So if we have any school groups come through, or if we have any Zoom classes to go out to classrooms, that's usually my job. But I also do any TV crews or VIP guests, I suppose. So a lot of the time that's me. I'll be doing those tours. So a lot of the time I'm doing tours throughout the museum, so introducing people to our laboratory, our collection room, and our new attractions down at Dinosaur Canyon and the March of the Titanosaurs. I'm also doing a lot of the social media for Age of Dinosaurs. So if you see anything on Facebook or Instagram for the museum, it's usually me. So I have a bit of fun with it some days. But for the most part, most of the staff we have up here at Age of Dinosaurs are also tour guides. So they're running daily tours. They're taking interested people like yourselves through the museum and introducing them to the dinosaurs that we found out here. So we actually hire quite a fair few tour guides throughout the year. And usually our guides are out here seasonally. So they come out March, April, and then they leave October, November. So we actually start saying goodbye to our seasonal crew tomorrow. So we've got 2 people leaving tomorrow, 1 at the end of the week, and then 2 more leave at the end of next week. And there's a couple of others who'll drop off in the end of the month and through November. After that, we have our skeleton crew, pun intended. So the skeleton crew are staff who will stay over the summer months. So we have all of our coordinators, supervisors, and managers, but we're also going to have the actual staff who will be running the summer tours as well, which is good. So we actually run all throughout the year. So we will only be closed on Sundays in the summer, and that's just because of how hot it is out here. So looking at nearly 50 degrees for some days, so it gets pretty hot. Otherwise, other jobs that you can do in paleontology, either with our museum or with other museums, there's your tour guides, educators, and presenters, but there's also paleontologists. So a paleontologist is someone who has gone off and has studied dinosaurs, or they've studied so they've studied geology, they've studied biology, they've studied chemistry, and they're trying to figure out more about Australia's prehistory, so before the written record. So some people will do vertebrate paleontology, so they're actually studying animals with a backbone like dinosaurs or pterosaurs or marine reptiles. Some will do invertebrate paleontology, which is studying seashells and other animals that would have been around without a backbone. You will have some who do micro paleontology, so that's studying your fossil fuels and stuff like that. There's Paleo Artists. I've actually got a good example over here. So Paleo Artists are the ones who get to have the most fun, I think. So they're actually the ones who try and figure out what fossils would have looked like. So this one's just the colouring in book, but I thought the animals in it looked pretty cool. So with your paleo artists, they're trying to figure out what a dinosaur or other ancient creature would look like based on the bones, based on the evidence of the bones. And I think that's one of the harder jobs, just trying to figure that all out, because we don't have a time machine, so we don't really know for sure. So a lot of it is pretty guess and check. You're also going to have people who study how the continents have moved, how the Earth has changed from the age of dinosaurs or from older or younger time periods. You're also going to have people who are going to study early humans, so our ancient ancestors, and trying to figure out what the connection is, what that evolutionary leap is from our ancestors to the humans we recognise now. So I think that one's pretty hard because there's a lot of politics involved with that one.
Excellent.
Yeah, so lots and lots of different jobs in paleontology.
Thank you, Grace. That is wonderful. It was so good to have you here and answering all of those great questions about Australian dinosaurs and the amazing work that you're doing up there at the Australian Age of Dinosaurs. So, guys...